Okay, great. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Ernie Wong. I work at the Army Cyber Institute. Again, I am one of the two feds that spoke today. And what I'm going to be talking about, though, is mostly on innovation. So from this morning's keynote speech with Sanjay, he's talking about innovation. That's really the area where the U.S. currently has a competitive advantage. And my talk is really trying to identify how we can form a framework for developing better and more successful innovations. But before I get too much into the presentation, I wanted to give a little bit of background on what we do at the Army Cyber Institute and what the Army Cyber Institute's all about. And so let me see if this video will now play. So this is actually a video that CNET generated, about 3 minutes, a little bit about West Point and cyber curriculum, and then what we're doing at the Army Cyber Institute.
No, reload.
What is the future of cyber attacks? And what's the military doing about it? We visited West Point, the Army's prestigious 200-year-old military academy, to watch the annual Cyber Defense Exercise, dubbed CDX, a yearly competition among service academies to see which teams can protect their servers from NSA hackers.
People are starting to realize that we've built all these things that we're now relying on, but we sort of built it out in front of the idea of security, and so things are kind of getting away from us. And now we need to take some time to kind of ratchet it back in and figure out how we're going to manage this really complex world we built.
The West Point team spent months creating a server that could handle email, file transfers, and other services for thousands of simulated users. For several days, the group of 24 cadets huddled together in a computer lab to guard their systems against exploits from the NSA.
Cyber is the new frontier, always learning new things, always developing new things, and being able to protect something that's so important in our everyday life is definitely crucial.
A scoreboard was projected in the front, showing how well Army was faring against competing teams, with grades based on how well each group maintains its network. Naturally, the Army team streamed their activities live on Twitch. The top team takes home this big shiny trophy. This year, though, Army's big rival, Navy, won.
We're also here to visit the Army Cyber Institute, which is a new think tank here that asks all the different questions about what the future of cyber defense may look like.
We met its director, Colonel Andrew O'Hall. He talked about the Army's efforts to predict potential ways the country could face an attack, a concept called threat casting, now that internet connections are just about everywhere.
With threat casting, you're trying to put yourself into what the attack surface would look like in 10 years. Because we know the attack surface is going to be huge.
He went on to describe a series of potential cyber threats we may face in the future, such as a personal care robot being hacked and harming its owner, or a hack on a dam that causes a catastrophic disaster. Pulse Think Tank is also considering the potential of some pretty sci-fi concepts, like augmented soldiers and autonomous drones.
One of the main efforts we've been doing is trying to figure out how the Army will bring cyber and cyber effects to the battlefield.
I don't know if it's terrifying or comforting that high-level Army officials are thinking about robot attacks and bionic soldiers. And sure, cyber attacks may worsen, but efforts like these should help the military prepare a little more for what's coming.
So that just gives a little bit introduction what the ACI does. It really is just a snippet of what we do. But before I get started, I'm actually going to introduce myself as this talk goes along, so you get a little bit about my background and personality as I go through these slides. What the ACI is, we were stood up in 2012 by a directive by the Secretary of Defense. Looking again, you might have heard some of the other talks talking about how cyber stood up as a domain of the battlefield in 2009. And in 2012, we were stood up as a institute that could really do two things: build impactful partnerships and build intellectual capital discussing cyber and cyber in the future. And that's why events such as this are great. It allows me to do both of these. It's not only promoting my research, but trying to reach out to the greater audience here, academia, government, and industry, trying to bridge the expertise that the military currently lacks. Again, we were stood up in 2012. We have a new director. You saw him on the CNET video. This is the direction of our new mission. This will go active, we think, later this summer. And again, kind of similar things. Conduct interdisciplinary research to shape future thoughts. And really what I grabbed out of it, because I was doing research on innovation, well, I still see that develop innovative solutions for enabling cyber resiliency. So when I saw these two, I said, yeah, I'm on the right track. I'm not doing anything that's counter to what my director or what the ACI is trying to accomplish. And so similar to ANYCon, the Army Cyber Institute hosts its own conference called Cyber Talks twice a year. We have all our videos online as well. If you go to cyber.army.mil, we have all these videos. And instead of watching every single video, the nice thing is they're captured by title. I usually play in my classrooms. I teach as well as being a researcher in the Army Cyber Institute. I teach systems engineering at the United States Military Academy. And one of the things I first started, I am actually very new to the cyber domain. I started with my job here in the ACI 2 years ago. And so everyone that's talking about the education track, all the changes that are going on, I've just been a user prior to just 2 years ago. So I'm just learning about all these dangers really that we're hearing about from all these talks. And for Cyber Talks, the title of it's called Disruptive Cyber Innovation. And this is really what a news clipping says of it. The whole intent for Cyber Talks, it gives a voice to disruptive cyber innovations. So when I saw that, I kept asking myself, so what exactly is disruptive cyber innovation that we're trying to promote at the ACI? And so what I did was I looked into the literature review and looked into what innovation is in general. And really, if you look at the way I quantify it, I don't think of innovations as one monolithic entity. I break it down. So instead of looking at innovations, I use 2 quadrants. I'm looking at the technological complexity or sophistication of an idea. And then I'm looking at whether or not that innovation targets an existing market or one that's very well ill-defined or underserved. And so when I break it up into these quadrants, what we find out is that on the low technological complexity and existing markets, we have sustaining innovations. This is what's essentially meeting the customer needs, right? We know a lot of companies that do that, right? They change very little of the product formula, right? A lot of times it's just adding new colors, adding new product differentiating, make a sustaining innovation. On the high complexity but then still existing markets, I call that incremental innovation or evolutionary. Now, the terms I'm going to use here, I'm using them in specific ways. I know in the media, and I've heard a lot of talks where a lot of this gets confused. But I'm going to use all 4 of these types of innovations in specific language. On the high complexity and new markets, again, these are rarely ill-defined. These are ill-defined markets or underserved markets. I call these breakthrough innovations or jumping the curve. And you'll see why I call it jumping the curve in a little while. And finally, what I look at is, okay, what if it's a low-tech development, but we're also looking at new development, a new market? I call that disruptive innovation. And that's really, the term I actually prefer to use now is revolutionary innovation. Now, there's a lot of debate, right? A lot of media calls revolution, they confuse these top 2 quadrants. Revolutionary, radical, cutting edge, leading edge. I'm using this in a specific context because what I'm trying to do is, if you saw the second part of my title, is how do I leverage the hacker mentality to improve cyber defense, cyber deterrence? And I'm focusing on the disruptive innovation side. And so to get clarity on why I'm looking at these different types of innovation, just a quick quiz here, or just a polling. This might be, I guess, I don't think they have that show anymore, right? Are you smarter than a 5th grader? Okay, so show of hands, who thinks a tomato is a fruit? All right, who thinks a tomato is a vegetable? Excellent. I have someone with me. All right. I've given this talk and I get to dictate, right? But nah. Most of you are smarter than a 5th grade, apparently. Okay, so when I make distinctions in a plant, right, we have roots, we have stems, leaves, and then, again, there's fruit. And again, so from a botanist's perspective, a tomato is a fruit. But some of the kind of interesting ones. Who thinks a cucumber's a fruit? Cucumber's a fruit, right? It's got the seeds. So if you're looking technically from a botanist's perspective, All right, we get the tomato part. I might have answered too, but the cucumber? All right, but if you got the tomato, most of the audience, that's good. But hold on, we're not done. At the end of the lecture, I'll give you the secret. Okay, but really, that's why I want to make these distinctions. Okay, from an innovation perspective, by looking at these 4 quadrants, I think we get a better idea of what types of innovation are more successful than others, and how we can actually get to the more riskier innovations, but then doing more successful them as well. If I look at sustaining innovations, the character that comes to my mind when I think of sustaining innovations is Spock. I saw someone that had a R2-D2 Star Trek Star Wars t-shirt yesterday. I think they're in the audience. And so I'll give you a little secret. I'm a Star Trek fan. So Spock, really, right, he's giving the Captain Kirk, right, the most logical, the highest probability definitions or courses of actions. That's what you choose, right? You go with Spock's guidance and he won't lead you in the wrong direction. But I call that sustaining innovation, right? It's not really leading to any great new developments, but it's giving you the best selection at that time. For incremental, I'm going to give you a little hint here. This is giving you a little background on my military intelligence background. I'm a military intelligence officer, and so these are sort of the things that sort of inspired me. In incremental, who read Mad Magazine as a kid? Okay, you sort of remember the spy versus spy? That's what incremental or evolutionary innovation is. A lot of folks call evolutionary innovations these other higher ends too. I don't. I call evolutionary innovations, all you're doing is you're looking at your major competitor, and all you're trying to do is one up the competitor, right? Spy versus spy. The white spy is trying to kill the black spy. Usually they're trying to kill each other, right? And so that's why I'm looking at incremental or evolutionary innovation. Breakthrough innovation, the way I categorize it, or the way I like to think about it, is James Bond, right? James Bond has the resources of Q, the entire core, master core of MI5, right? In the movies, he's always saving the day with some gadget or some car or some airplane that has breakthrough types of innovation, right? It's nothing that the common person has. This is something the Q division has designed specifically for Bond to get him out of troubles, and then come up with the climax of the storyline. Now, so for disruptive, right, revolutionary innovations, right, the character I used for that is MacGyver, right? If you think about MacGyver, he is using what is at his disposal to save a day, right? A pencil, a chewing gum. What else is there? You guys are. Swiss Army knife, right? Pens, right? Wherever's at his disposal, right? He doesn't have the resources. He should, right? He's working for the U.S. government, but he should. But the way the TV describes it is that he's using disruptive, right? I call it revolutionary types of innovation to save the day. Now, again, most of the audience here I'm polling right now should remember MacGyver, but if you don't remember MacGyver, I got a few folks who are a little younger. So if you don't remember MacGyver, I'm using Jason Bourne then as the other example, right? The contrasts with James Bond, especially the Pierce Brosnan James Bond. I'm not really talking about the Daniel Craig, right? In Casino Royale, he tried to be a little more like Jason Bourne, but in all the other ones, right? The Quantum of Solace, he's bringing back over here, right? He was giving me all the cyber stuff, all the devices. So Jason Bourne, right? He's saving the day with whatever he can find, right? The Mini Coupe that he drives, he has a stick. That's what he's going to use. Okay. Now, if you look at this assembly of characters I here have to sort of identify or at least associate with each of the types of innovation, one doesn't stand out. Again, I'm telling you I'm a military intelligence officer. Which one doesn't stand out? Or which one is wrong, right? Spock is wrong, right? Yeah, Spock is out of character here. Yes, so Spock, even though I'm a Star Trek fan, he's out of character here from all these spies. So really, any Mission Impossible fans? I'm not talking about the new Mission Impossible with Tom Cruise. I'm talking about Mission Impossible back in it was actually turned color as well. So Spock, right? He was Paris, right? Leonard Nimoy played Paris in Mission Impossible. And he was the guy who spoke 10 different languages. He was a master of disguises. So again, he didn't use any high-tech equipment. It was what was available to him from his, really I call him a human intelligence type of guy, right? He's a spy. He's using all his tradecraft and all the tools as his wit and all the intelligence that he has. So that's really, if I use the analogy of all these spies, this is really what I like to think of as these 4 quadrants of innovation. Now, from a military perspective, again, a lot of this talk is going to be from a military perspective, and that's really where my background is. The way I think of all these 4 quadrants is sustaining is I look at the M16 rifle. Right, the M16 rifle, widely in use during the Vietnam War. That was the M16 version. It then developed into the M16A2, M16A3, and today we have the M4. Right, all it was a variation on a very good design. Right, smaller barrels, trying to get more compact, greater accuracy. Right, protecting the soldiers, hand guards, heat guards. That's all it really was. But great innovations that improved on a great initial design. What about incremental? The incremental analogy I use for military is chaff. Chaff actually developed in World War II. The Air Force designed it, primarily the British. It was the British that came up against electromagnetic countermeasures. It was trying to defeat radar as the British aircraft were competing against the Germans at the time, the Nazis, both sides, right? Fierce battles over the skies. Chaff was trying to negate the radars on both sides, right? Nazis had their radars, British had their radars. Eventually it developed into a countermeasure for direct heat-seeking missiles, right? That's what all these are. The chaff today is mostly trying to negate the heat-seeking capabilities of today's missiles. What about breakthrough? Yeah, the U.S. has a pretty good history with breakthrough innovations, right? Going back again to World War II, that's a picture of, I can't remember if it's is it Little Boy or Fat Man? I can't remember which one that is now. But again, that's nuclear weapons. That's breakthrough types of innovation, right? Long R&D times, very expensive, very highly technical, right? A lot of academics sequestered in Los Alamos to develop that nuclear weapons program, Manhattan Project. Okay. We also have some recent examples, right? In order to in order to win the Cold War, right? Back in the 70s, DARPA primarily led a lot of these efforts. Stealth, precision guided missions, GPS. Again, these are the types of innovation that very few folks can do. Governments can do this, right? We can think of, right? We call them advanced precision threats. Yeah, China's, the Russia's, the Iran's, even, it's crazy when I call North Korea an advanced persistent threat. But they're doing some breakthrough things, okay? But what about disruptive? Does the U.S. have a history of doing disruptive innovation? Do we even have that in our DNA? Special forces, that's who I would agree. I would agree special forces, and I would also say Marines. Those are the folks that I would look at for doing disruptive innovations for the U.S. military. But what about our history? Going all the way back. How did our nation start? Revolution. That's why I call it revolutionary, right? I call this, I'm actually going to change my slides. My papers, I'm calling this revolutionary innovations, right? That's a picture of the Revolutionary War, right? U.S. militia, we had a talk from our, Army Reserve, Army National Guard talking about the militias. Yeah, we hid behind trees in order to fight against the British regulars. The British regulars, that's their name because they were professionally trained. George Washington's army was a militia, right? They had no training. They were farmers. They were blacksmiths. They were whoever you could cobble together, right? Just like Jason Bourne, just like MacGyver, using whoever you had, in order to fight against the 1% tax that the British imposed on the U.S., or the colonies at that time without representation, right? How different the world would have been if the British had negotiated, yeah, we'll give you representation, we'll just keep your tax though. That would have been interesting. Well, I wouldn't be here, probably. In World War II, again, World War II, there's a lot of innovation coming out of World War II. That's a picture of a Nazi submarine getting blown up. A big development, most people think of the Enigma project, right? When I show that picture, I consider the Enigma close to the breakthrough side, right? Long lead times, the computer. Who saw the imitation game? Yeah, right. That was the first computer. Alan Turing's computer was trying to break the Enigma code. So I consider Enigma probably breakthrough, right? It's closer to breakthrough. Very, a lot of scientists, right? All mathematicians trying to figure out how to break the code. The interesting thing on the U.S. side was that during World War II, operations research came into being. Again, I'm an operations researcher by academic training. That's where I got my master's degree. That's where I studied the origins of operations research. And really what the mathematicians on the U.S. side, the military mathematicians, figured out was that if you had a ship convoy of more than one, so if you had a ship convoy, your chances of surviving increased substantially. It wasn't until after the war when they captured the German U-boat commanders when they figured out why this was so. Right? To be in a diesel submarine back in the time, it was very effective, right? The Nazi submarines ruled the Atlantic, especially against the British, for a substantial period of time. That's essentially what got us in the war, right? Sinking Lusitania. What we found out when we captured these German submarine captains, was that German U-boat commanders did not want to get spotted. They wanted to survive so they could attack another ship. If you had a shipping convoy of 2 or more ships, you fire at one ship, the other ship's going to see you. And when that ship sees you, they call them the U-boat hunters, right? Essentially the aircraft that can hunt down the U-boats. So the German U-boat commanders did not want to shoot at convoys of more than 2 or more ships. So that's kind of interesting, right? Just mathematics, statistical analysis that gave us a way to negate the dominance of the U-boats during World War II. I have there a modern day example, right? Drones. Again, I'm not talking about the Air Force drone. Any Air Force folks in here? Okay, this is the Army side, right? The Marine side. If anyone's seen the Air Force drone, it's the Global Hawk. That thing is huge. It's bigger than a Cessna. I'm considering that more breakthrough. But for the Air Force, yeah, for the Air Force mentality, yeah, that's disruptive. Because the Air Force, they're thinking satellites, they're thinking huge, faster weapon systems. And that's what I think why I do not think the Air Force can ever do disruptive innovation for the military. I would keep them in the breakthrough side. That's their core competency, that's their DNA. I would consider it soft forces, Marines. There's some other units out there as well that will be more beneficial doing disruptive innovations, right? Hackers. Leverage the hacking community. That's what I'm trying to encourage. So the problem with what I have here is, right, I don't have any numbers on my scales. That's a problem, right? If you're a mathematician, that's terrible. I think we've seen a number of presentations today that do that. But I actually leverage that. By not having a scale, I'm actually going to add one more scale. And that's why this talk is called Thinking Inside the Box, right? If once I add this other scale, this becomes 3D. I've used a 2D representation here, but now it's a box. And by adding this third axis, offset potential, right, this is no longer the same, right? This actually changes to where it's disruptive and breakthrough innovations or revolutionary and cutting-edge innovations that give us the most potential to change the environment, to change the future. Sustaining incremental will not do it, right? There are very small changes. They're effective, but they're small changes. So really, if I look at this graph, this is really how it would look if I add this third axis here, offset potential. Another way of looking at it, instead of offset potential, if I call it the probability of success, it changes now. Once again, if you're doing disruptive breakthrough innovations, you should be expecting failures. So when business books, right, those CEOs are telling you to take risks, they're not telling you to take risks here. You should be getting 80, 90, 70, 80, 90, 100% success down here. They're telling you should be looking at disruptive and breakthrough innovations, right? So by quantifying this as a framework, I think this gives you a better understanding of what types of innovation a company, anything, or an individual, as individuals, what you should be doing and making sure you're maximizing what your strengths are to the innovations that you're seeking. And personally, as an econ major, I was school trained in operations research, but my undergraduate degree was economics. The reality is there's a portfolio, an optimal portfolio theory you can think of. You really should be, right? Anyone, investors here? The investors will tell you want a balanced portfolio, right? Diversification. So the reality is we actually want all types of innovation, but then seek out the best from each of the quadrants. Now, I told you as a military officer, I use military examples. And so this is one way I think I'm trying to quantify these probabilities of success here. I'm looking here at the 2010-2011 Green Revolution that took place across the Middle East, North Africa. If you remember that started back in Holy smokes, yeah. December of 2010, when a street vendor in Tunisia self-immolated himself because the police confiscated essentially all his fruits and vegetables that he was selling. Might have been tomatoes, I don't know. But they confiscated all the things that he was selling, and that was essentially his livelihood. And so he burned himself, and that sparked, this is crazy, it sparked throughout the entire region, a total of 14 countries revolted. Okay, a lot of oppression going on in these countries. Okay, so it didn't take much to spark that. Do you know how many of these succeeded? It's only been 5 years, right? Yeah, not a whole lot of success. Just before I give you the numbers here, just a look around the room, just a guesstimate. What do you think the success rates are for disruptive, revolutionary, or breakthrough, cutting-edge innovations? Just sort of random poll here. 5%? Okay. I'm doing bidding now. I'm sort of like an auctioneer. Any higher? Any lower? 20%? Okay. Lower? Anyone think lower? 1%? Okay. So somewhere between. Single person or like an organization? Any type of revolution. Any type of revolution. Because again, our history tells us, right? The U.S. revolted and we won, but that was in one instance. That's kind of. Yeah. So anywhere from essentially 1% to 20%. Anyone higher than 20%? Yeah, that's actually not too bad here. So we had a total of, out of 14 countries, 4 actually turned over immediately. There are other countries that actually the kings said they'll step down, but after their term ends. But these are the 4 that immediately overturned. I do not count Egypt though. Egypt was a coup. And the reason I don't count Egypt when I'm looking at revolutions is because the military has the capacity to take over a country. They have the resources, they have the training, right? They are in the breakthrough area already. So for a military coup to take over, that's why it's actually very dangerous. As a military officer again from the United States, that's one of the reasons why the military is so inefficient. I know we're going to get another talk here, 2 after mine, where they say U.S. DoD defense is good. But I'm telling you right now, we know from experience, the military is slow, right? We had a couple of talks about that. Dan gave a talk about the military is slow, and it's for a reason. Our Congress does not like our military, right, to be like the Roman military. Right? We learned from history that the Romans, they pledged allegiance to their general. Right? The general was the one that fed them. The general was the one that gave them their clothing, their pay. Everything was pledged to the generals, right? In America, we pledge our loyalty to the Constitution, right? Not to the general, to the Constitution first, right? Sure. There's a chain of command. There's a president. He's the commander-in-chief. But we pledge our loyalty, right? We pledge to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That's not the case for many countries. Okay? And that's what we see here, the military coups. That's bad. But again, so if we look at the numbers here, gets cut off here. About 21%. I'm actually thinking, whoever said 20%, that's actually really good. I'm actually more inclined to think it's closer to 10%. But so if we look at this, right, going back to this notion of probability of success here, at best, I'm thinking major league batting averages. So again, if you go up to 30%, you're doing really well, right? 20%, yeah, you're doing okay. But again, I think that Hollywood gives us So the better way of thinking of, instead of Star Wars Episode 4, I recommend, my favorite is 5, right? When Darth Vader comes back, when Empire Strikes Back, that's bad. And really, I think I should have gone back, right? Going back to here, one country am I missing? Syria, right? Still to be determined. In my studies of insurgencies, counterinsurgencies, revolutionary warfare, the fact that the Russians have come in, and the fact that it's taken this long now, it'll be very difficult for the U.S. to support the the insurgent forces. If we had come in earlier and with greater support of those forces early on, we might have done something. It's too late now. The fact that Russia's back into it, Assad's So another way of looking at this framework is through a timeline. So these 4 quadrants here, the sustaining and incremental innovations, if we think about it as companies, right, these monopoly, especially if you're not monopoly, right, the bigger you are, right, all you're really doing is incremental sustaining innovation. Sure, you're making progress over time. It's because we expect, as customers, we expect it, right? That's market expectations of performance. So customers expect it, demand it. And that's what these companies are doing. Unfortunately, these big companies especially, they are catering to their best customers, right? Business schools teach these CEOs or MBAs, right, folks who graduate with MBAs, to focus on the highest profit margins. So their best customers are who they focus on. And that's what this notion of disruptive innovation comes from. But before I get into disruptive, right, this notion of breakthrough, I call it jumping the curve, is because these innovations come off this curve and hopefully, if they're successful, bring the curve much higher. Okay? But this notion of disruptive innovations comes from, I got cut off. That's on the bottom here. Joseph Bauer and Clayton Christensen, a couple of Harvard Business School professors, and they're examining this thing. Why is it that leading companies who are on this green line, why do they sometimes succumb to these startups? And so from their studies, they study this notion of disruptive innovations, and the notion is that this disruptor, right, it initially appeals to emerging markets, only a small segment of the market. It's not appealing to the existing markets. It can be new markets or underserved markets. And it focuses on different sets of criteria that are valued. Right? That's what I'm thinking the hackers are, right? Hackers are looking at the cyberspace in a different way than big companies are. Okay? And initially, it's going to be far worse off in a number of mainstream areas. But the great thing is that, right, if you look at the trend line, it advances much more rapidly, right, once the public or the underserved market continues to buy the product or gets attracted to the product. And so if we look at history, some of the examples of these products, right, Xerox versus Canon. Xerox was the big monster, right? Xerox PARC. They were the leading innovators. They were the breakthrough innovators. Who taught in schools 20 years ago? Any educators? Right? Or if you're in the corporate, Fortune 500 companies, what was your print department like? There was a print department, right? In a lot of companies. Huge machines. That's what Xerox made, right? The size of this room, right? If you're in your university, the size of this room would have been your print department, right? Xerox continued to cater to the biggest and best customers, right? Universities, governments, large corporations, right? These printers can do anything that you wanted. Back in the days, right? Getting printers to collate and to hole punch and staple, that's a big deal. Especially the printing, right? Textbook size things for their students. What did Canon do in the 80s? Yeah, they came up with these small, clunky machines, far inferior, right? If Xerox laughed at Canon, right? Xerox laughed at HP, right? I think that's actually a trait. If you're doing disruptive innovations and your breakthrough competitors are laughing at you, that's probably you're on the right track. That's what I'm thinking. Canon catered to the home personal market, right? Small, compact, yeah, nowhere near the quality of Xerox, right? But the home-based business, right? A lot more customers immediately flocked to him because it was cheaper, right? Instead of a multi-million-dollar print division, you just needed a home-based computers or home-based print machine, right? Canon. That's what you got. Another example was IBM versus Apple. Very similar, right? IBM focused on the mainframes. Apple focused on the personal computing market. IBM laughed at Apple. Why do you need this, right? And so, right, what we have today is, right, a lot of folks with laptops and PCs, tablets now. What about the automotive industry? This was actually not, this was a anomaly, right? Unlike these other, right, a lot of disruptive innovations, this was actually a shock that gave the upper hand to Toyota and Honda and their likes. What was a shock? Remember in the late 70s, 79? Gas prices, the Iranian oil embargo. Right? So at that time, right, everyone in the U.S., the markets preferred, right, bigger cars. We preferred, as Americans, right, acceleration. Right? We didn't like these Japanese cars that were tiny, right? The one saving grace was fuel economy. But that was, right, it was because of a shock that a lot of people's customers' taste changed to fuel economy. That became a driving factor. And it really wasn't quality at first. Quality came afterwards. It was fuel economy, and as Hondas, the Toyotas, they moved up this curve, then quality for them started to improve as well. What do we see today? Who's competing against the Hondas and Toyotas? And even the Subarus, right? Subarus, Fuji. Who's competing against the Japanese automakers today? Well, hybrids, but the Toyota's got a hybrid. But what companies? From what countries? Yeah, Kia, the Hyundais, South Korea, right? South Korea did the same thing to Toyota, right? As Toyota and Honda, they went off the disruptive, they went mainstream, right? Today's Corolla is bigger than the 70s Camry, right? They came on this mainstream line, and they said that we're not going to compete against right? I told you the MBAs from Honda and Toyota. They said, hey, we want to focus on the higher profit margin areas. Hyundai came in and said, we're going to focus on the lower end, and we're going to hopefully quickly develop, and that's what they've done, right? The Hyundais are now competing against the Toyotas from disruptive. Now, who's competing against Hyundai today? We're at probably 2 or 3 years from now. India. What's the company there? Tata? I think it's Tata. China as well, right? China's got a company called Chery. Yeah. So we see this dynamic playing out time and time again. The Tatas of India and the Cherys of China, those will probably compete successfully in a disruptive fashion against these companies. There is a way to negate it if you're a big company. If you realize it, it's market share, right? You should be competing on market share and not let these insurgent, disruptive, revolutionary companies get their foothold. But again, MBAs, right? We don't teach that to our MBAs. We tell our MBAs to focus on high profit margins. So that's why we leave these open for companies that want to attack in this disruptive space. Today, right? Anyone still use BlackBerry? I used a BlackBerry because the government gave me one, right? That was 2 years ago. But again, there's still some security features on BlackBerry that are still nice. But BlackBerry, I'm talking about slow, right? BlackBerry now does have their smartphone, but it can't compete very well against the Androids and the iPhones, right? They've given away way too much market share. Right? What was the thing that BlackBerry had, though? Back in the start of the Obama administration, way back when. Keyboard, right? So if you think about it, what was the company? BlackBerry RIM? Was that the company? Yeah, they said, yeah, we want to make bigger keyboards, right? We want to make the experience better for our primary customers, right? Who did Apple target with their iPhone? Consumer. I could not have found anyone older than 75 with the BlackBerry. Right? That's when you saw these commercials came out with the Cricket, right? You want cheap, right? You want devices that competed against the BlackBerry, right? When the iPhone and all these Android devices came out, the mainstream consumer now bought it, right? It wasn't the experts, right? So that's what we see even today. I had a question from someone in my previous talk. That's why I added that one. What I do want to leave with is this notion of, again, I cannot overemphasize that breakthrough and disruptive innovations closer to I'm thinking 10 to 20% success range, okay? Major league batting averages. A lot more failures than successes. When they do succeed though, right, huge changes, right? Breakthrough, you're jumping the curve. Disruptive, you're immediately going into those new value criteria that improves at a much rapid rate. Okay, so looking back now at this notion of innovations, this monolithic notion of innovations, where can we best protect the future? Now, I emphasized, right, disruptive innovations. Yeah, we should be looking at there. We also need to be looking at breakthrough innovations. We also need to be looking at sustaining and incremental innovations. We need to be doing all four. Okay, that's the key, and that's really what I think what Sanjay was talking about this morning. Okay, we need to be doing all four innovations in order to compete successfully against primarily the advanced persistent threat nations that we're competing against. And again, here's another military example. I focus on the disruptive space, revolutionary space, because our recent military history, right? If you can look back at really our conflicts where we've had problems, this is the Korean War. In the Korean War, what was it that MacArthur struggled with? General MacArthur again, did a great job against the North Koreans, right? Pushed them all the way to the Chinese border, but then the Chinese army started coming in, right? In total, it was 1 million Chinese volunteers that crossed the Yellow River. All volunteers, according to the Chinese. The Chinese army conducted their movements exclusively at night. So whether or not they realized it, MacArthur was relying on, again, 1945 through 48, new developments in ISR. What was the Air Force? Again, this time the Air Force became their own branch of the service. Electrical, optical, or imaging devices, right? Pictures, wet film. So MacArthur relied exclusively from his J2 on wet film. What's the problem with wet film technology? Daylight only, right? We've seen movies, right? The body of proof, whatever it is. Yeah, there's ways to negate any technology. And the Chinese, whether or not they figured it out or not, they conduct their movements exclusively at night. And so the estimates were that for every engagement, the big engagement that MacArthur's army faced, 8th Army, he underestimated the Chinese strength by 10. That's huge for military, right? We want a factor of 2 is great. He underestimated, again, as a military intelligence officer, I thought his J2 would have been fired, right, after the first time. Yeah, for essentially a year, yeah, his J2 underestimated the Chinese military strength. But that was because they relied on wet film. Okay. What about the Vietnam War? In the Vietnam War, the U.S. forces could not stop the supply lines known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We had the best Air Force breakthrough, right? We had the best we had air dominance over Vietnam. Nothing the Viet Cong had where the North Vietnamese could touch our Air Force. Yeah, they shot some of them down, but we had air dominance. Right? We bombed the heck out of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We dropped more bombs over the Ho Chi Minh than we did during all of World War II. It's amazing, right? All those bomb attacks over Dresden, we dropped more bombs over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. A lot of it was secret, right? It didn't come out until Watergate tapes. But the Ho Chi Minh Trail was not initially dependent upon supply lines. It wasn't dependent on infrastructure. It was dismounted. The infantry, right? It was a dismounted network. So if there's a bomb or crater there, right, you just walk around it, right? Bypass. Right? We teach our military folks that. You don't go through an obstacle. You bypass it. That's what the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese did. So the supply line stayed open. Now, towards the end of the war, yeah, then they developed the infrastructure, right? It became so heavily trafficked that they started building roads. But initially, we bombed the heck out of them and did nothing. What about the recent conflicts? The major killer there was IEDs, right? Still going on, IEDs. Would you consider that very sophisticated? It wasn't, right? They used initially very unsophisticated remnants of the Iran-Iraq war. There were still mortar shells on the battlefield. Even when I was stationed in Iraq, and we have this thing in a placard on our vehicle that's called unexploded ordnance call. We're supposed to call it in anytime we see it. There was so many that was useless. It was, why would you call it in? All remnants of the Iran-Iraq war. So infinite numbers of munitions that the insurgents can use. It's all laying on the fields. It's all over the place. Yeah, did they get better over time? Yeah, sure. Yeah, they sort of moved into the incremental, moved sustaining, right? Remote control detonators instead of pressure plate command detonated. Yeah, so again, but initially very crude devices. Cyber warfare. My contention is nearly all malware, especially when it gets started, starts off in the disruptive space. If it's a version 1, it's a disruptive type of. We've heard it from all talks the past 2 days, right? We work for hours and hours just to get that breach into some firewall, some defensive measures. Okay, that's my concern. Okay, my concern is that our military, if we're not focused on disruptive space, we're going to lose. That's a concern for me. There's this. Everyone familiar with the Hacker's Dictionary? Okay, yeah. So we already have a distinction here, right? A lot of all these cons are not called hacker conventions anymore, right? They're info security conventions. Because we want to make distinction between hackers and crackers being the bad guys. But I'm going to take it one step further, right? When I'm thinking inside this box here, the cracker, right, is our disruptive innovator on the offensive side. On the defensive side, I told you I was a Star Trek fan. I'm also a Star Trek fan. I'm equal opportunity in sci-fi. And not so much on Doctor Who, though, because that was great. But I'm calling ourselves cyber trackers, right? If you think about the Wild West, right, the trackers, making do with whatever they had at disposal in order to track the bad guys, right? Or if you want to be a trekker, I prefer calling a trekker, right? Because if you're on the USS Enterprise, especially the original Enterprise, right, you are left to your own disposal. Star Trek Voyager got towards it, right? They were lost in space, sort of, and left to their own disposal. But if you're a trekker, you're a good guy, and you're trying to use whatever's at disposal. Sure, Captain Kirk violated the Prime Directive a number of times, but it was for the greater good. Okay, what about on the sustaining side? Yeah, it's okay to be a slacker, right? Yeah, I'm saying again, if you want to be doing all types of innovation, it's okay to be a slacker. Especially if you are on the cyber protection teams that our military has, that you can do all this stuff, right? If you want to be an offensive hacker, join the military, because we allow you to do that. So be a slacker. Better yet, be a cyber linebacker, right? Anyone watch the Blind Side with cyber linebacker, right? The JT Lawrence's. That's why if you're a cyber linebacker, you can do a lot more for a defense. What about the breakthrough side? I'm calling the stacker. Again, all these are rhyming now, right? The stacker is a Stuxnet type of attacker. I'm not admitting that it was either the Israelis or the US that did it, but according to the 0 Days movie, that's who it pointed to. Okay. Again, Old Blacker is on the defensive side. You're going to have to check this one out yourself. This is the Dr. Seuss. That was my inspiration for this slide, Dr. Seuss. I try to find wherever it could rhyme with a cracker. So an Old Blacker is the breakthrough cyber defense guy. On the incremental side, what am I thinking of? I'm thinking of basketball here. So if you're an attacker, I'm thinking you're a shack attacker, right? You're the biggest guy on the field, on the court, and all you do is you drive the ball to the basket, and that's how you're going to win. What about on the defensive side? How do you counter a shack attacker? You're a hack-a-shacker, right? Teams figured out, right? This guy can't throw free throws. So you just intentionally foul him. So don't give him the easy layup, right? Foul him and let him miss either one or two of his free throws. Okay? So really, if I'm thinking inside the box, I want you to be all of these things. Better yet, if you're specializing in one of these, right? Because not everyone can do all of these. Specialize in the area you're at. I'm hopefully promoting the defensive side. Cyber linebackers, hack-a-shackers, Old Blackers. My favorite is the trekker. Because what I found was, as I'm giving these talks and attending, primarily when I'm attending other people's talks, it's great. Especially the folks that are telling me, the hackers that are telling me the exploits they develop, they also tell me, right, the great talks are the ones where they tell you, here's the easy fix. I got into the system this way, and it was easy, right? It took me 2 hours, or it took me all night. But here's the easy fix. I'm not looking for the breakthrough innovation that will defeat it. I'm looking for what the hacker's telling me. If you did this one thing, it would have made my life difficult. And when I hear that, when I come to a info security conference and these talks, that's what I jot down. And those are the folks I want to talk to. Because those are the things I want to promote. I want to promote cyber trackers and trackers and what they're trying to do. Let me see. Now, this is actually, now if I'm looking at it from purely a cybersecurity perspective, remember I told you I think most of the malware resides in the disruptive space, but that's actually not correct. Most of the malware actually does reside in many spaces, actually in all spaces, but so is the defense. The defense is in all spaces. However, if you look at the preponderance of the malware initiates the disruptive. Sure, if you get into tit for tat, right? Spy versus spy. If the hacker can't get into a network but really wants to, then he starts looking at the incremental. Once you start getting into version controls of malware, yeah, you start getting sustaining, right? It becomes more efficiency, whatever works. However, overwhelmingly on the defensive side, if we look at cyber defense, right? All these blues, overwhelmingly cyber defense is in the breakthrough side. Right? We've had a couple talks during this conference that gives you some intimation of why that's so. Right? And why that's probably a problem. We're not looking at cyber defense the right way. And the way I look at it from, right, just by looking at this, right, for cyber offense, right, we're in all spaces except, right, there's no need for breakthrough, right? For the hack, all you need to do is get through. The problem is this, it's on the defense side. We are missing disruptive cyber defense. And that's my concern, right? If you look at it, there's a gap. Again, as a military intelligence officer, I'm looking for the gap. And when I see this, right, lights go off and say, hey, there's probably an opportunity here for us to change this paradigm. I'm looking for more disruptive, right here, disruptive cyber defense. And if you think, again, I cannot overemphasize once again, that disruptive innovations as well as breakthrough are tough, right? Who remembers the Yugo, right? That tried to be a disruptive automotive innovation, but it was just crap, right? It was priced right? That was a performance criteria that people liked, so people bought it. But from Yugoslavia, the quality was terrible, so that went away. Even today, right? If we think of today, a lot of folks think high tech, yeah, guaranteed to win. I actually found this by fluke. It came in one of I was looking at my MSN, right? One of the Pinterest top 10 things. Like, this is kind of cool. Who still remembers iTunes Ping? What about Dysphoria? Yeah, failed, right? MySpace. A lot of folks use MySpace, right? But the problem with MySpace was they tried to be everything to everyone. So it continued to morph until it really didn't mean a whole lot to the community, right? But a lot of failures. That's why I just want to emphasize. This is not just isolated to industrial companies, right? This is, right, any company, right? Tech companies are prone to it. Now here's the magic formula, right? If you're going to counter, if you're one of the guys in green, right? If you're sustaining your incremental, if you want to counter someone who's disruptive, I actually think this last one is the best way. You want to be an early adopter of promising experimentation. Experimentation is a key thing. A lot of companies don't do that though. They promote it, but they don't do it, right? Because again, they have MBAs as their CEOs, and the MBAs go, well, you go for the highest bang for a buck, right? We're not going to experiment with a lot of things that can fail. And here are some attributes of successful experimentation. Small, fast, and cheap. You want to be small, fast, and cheap. You learn more from cheap mistakes. You don't learn from expensive mistakes as much. You learn from small, fast, cheap mistakes. And you want to do the future as well as the present, right? You guys still do your operations. Well, we hear that from folks that give talks on agile development all the time, right? You got to keep focused on your present, keep focused on your main core business, but then leave some flexibility for the future. And again, here, I'm going to close out pretty soon. Again, here's the danger with not experimenting and not doing disruptive innovations, right? I already talked about the breakthrough, right? Again, those are tough to do, but those are expensive. If you're not doing disruptive innovations, the problem is you're not doing research. And the problem if you're not doing research is you're not training your workforce to think about failures in the right way, right? Small, cheap failures are okay. But again, a lot of companies don't like to do that. The military, right? As a military officer, we hear this notion of we don't want to be a zero defects mentality. Sure, I would agree with that, but that's probably the case now. We probably don't have as much of a zero defects mentality, but I want to go further from that. I don't want just a non-zero defects. I want experimenting. There's a difference, right? I'm promoting experimentation. That is different from, right, by promoting a non-zero defects company, we're saying we're pretty conservative. I want to promote this notion of, I want to get disruption experiments back in the military. And that's how I think we're going to achieve better success in cyber defense. Again, I want to leverage the hackers as well, right? I want to come these forums, as Dan mentioned earlier, come these forums and then leverage the expertise of the folks who are doing this on a daily basis. You guys know what the easy hacks are to prevent the hacks that you make yourselves. And that's what I want to leverage. Now, I told you I wanted to end I'm near the end right now. I wanted to come back to this, right? A tomato is a vegetable, right? That's because I told you I support and defend the Constitution of the United States. In 1893, the Supreme Court deemed that tomato is a vegetable, and it's because, again, any lawyers in the room? Okay, so that's right. Yeah, we have a lawyer. It's because it was a notion of commerce, right? They didn't tax, right? Right, fruits. One or the other. Fruits or vegetables. One wasn't taxed. And so the justices said that, in common layman's term, people think tomatoes are vegetable, so we'll call it a vegetable. When in reality it's a fruit, right? If you're a botanist, it's a fruit. But, we see eye to eye. He must be like me. So this is, if you're a fifth grader, if you tell your kids this is the extra credit, right? You tell them this is the extra credit. That'll blow the teacher's mind away if they bring that up. Whew. So with that, I end the talk. And if you want to get a hold of the slides, if you want to contact me for any questions, that's my email address there, ernest.wong@usma.edu. That's another interesting about the Army Cyber Institute. We all have a EDU domain. And that was the notion that I think the question the gentleman here talked about. There's a lot of resistance with industry hackers communicating with especially folks in the military, right, or even the FBI. They think we're regulators, right? Nah, in our case, having that EDU domain actually helps us out. It's easier for us to communicate, doing our job, really, promoting impactful partnerships, building that body of knowledge, promoting this notion of innovation. Really for not just our military, really we understand it from this community, it's for our nation, right? All these talks that I've heard today, even though folks are saying I've heard a couple of them, I said don't be, overwhelmed by the hype, right? All these companies are giving hype. Yeah, but I'm still concerned with especially with Sanjay's talk this morning, right? He said the U.S. he thinks is the preeminent and offensive cyber capabilities. I can tell you with my understanding what the Russians are doing from a tactical perspective, they have done a better job linking their tactics. We talked about it. He talked about it, right? Ukraine, going back, Georgia, going back, Estonia, they have linked their strategic cyber weapons down to their tactics. So they're doing a lot better job, I can tell from a military perspective, than the U.S. is. And so while we might have more breakthrough, right? Talk about breakthrough innovations, those secrets are coming out, right? So, as those secrets come out, we will not have what the Air Force calls overmatch. And that's what the Air Force, why they like breakthrough innovations. It's overmatch. And so with that, I'll open up to any questions. I think we have about 2 more minutes. Any questions? Question about? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm curious. You mentioned the idea of disruptive blue team technology.
Yeah.
Now, I'm trying to imagine what that would be, because there's artificial intelligence already that's trying to detect things in transit. So,
Yeah.
what, in your mind, does a breakthrough problem-solving thing look like?
Yeah. So that's a great question, right? So the question is, for the benefit of the folks online in the future, what's a disruptive type of cyber defense? We have it today, right? Someone talked about it in an earlier presentation. InfraGard, right? Non-high technical, right? You're getting the community to discuss what someone experienced, right? A cyber attack. So when I talk about, when I actually write papers for all this, I actually have a paper on this. When I submit this as a paper, the most common, feedback I get when it gets rejected, I get rejected from these conferences too, but when the most common feedback I get is, your disruptive innovations are not innovative enough. So they're again thinking this side here, right? And in my abstract, I make it perfectly clear, this side, disruptive as well as sustaining, these types of innovation are not high tech. So InfraGard, right? Not high tech. You get the community together, discuss what the breach was, so everyone else knows. Other examples, I think, is when I come to these conferences, I learn about it. Cyber Patriot. Anyone knows about Cyber Patriot? I'm a big fan of that. They're trying to get school-age kids, not only school-age kids interested in cyber, but the instructors. They don't have to have expertise in cyber or an info security specialist or expert to teach this class. It could be a history professor. I think that is a great disruptive innovation. Some other disruptive innovation, okay, I'm going to get towards more of the closer to the breakthrough. I think that Duncan, when he talks about, if you attended his talk about, what is it, advanced, OpenC2 too, but also what was the John Hopkins one? Advanced active cyber defense? Active cyber defense. So what cued me on Duncan's talk was he talked about, we want to let the computers do what they're best at, breakthrough, but we also want to keep the human in the loop to do what the humans are best at. So that's what I think the intersection, when I say truly thinking inside the box, I haven't gone even the best part. Truly thinking inside the box is this space right here. Right? To get the highest success rates and to get the most impact, we want to look really not at each individual innovation here. I'm looking at the intersection. That's truly thinking inside the box. And that's why I think if we could get the best of humans, right, what they're good at, differentiation, humans tend to do good at that. Computers, we want to automate the heck out of it. Anything that gets to automation, the AI is getting towards breakthrough. But if we want to get to this space right here, tie it in with the disruptive space, and tie in a little bit of this incremental sustaining, I think we have something there. That's really truly what I think the thinking inside the box is. That's going to be my future talk. Great. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And again, if you have any questions, here's my email address again.